Fish is one of the foods physicians recommend most consistently to people managing diabetes. Lean protein, omega-3 fatty acids, low glycemic impact, no blood sugar spikes. For most people with diabetes, eating more fish sounds like straightforward, responsible advice. But the recommendation to eat fish is not a blanket endorsement of every fish prepared every way. And the 5 fish I am going to discuss today are ones that, for specific and well-documented biological reasons, actively work against the goals of diabetes management. Mercury that interferes with insulin function, inflammatory fatty acid profiles that worsen insulin resistance, farming contaminants that disrupt metabolic hormones, preparation methods that transform a protein into a rapid glucose spike. Most people with diabetes have never heard any of this from their physician because the conversation usually stops at eat more fish and eat less red meat. Today, we are going to go significantly further than that. I'm Dr. Jake Taylor. Today, I'm going to count down the 5 fish most problematic for people with diabetes, exactly why each one causes problems at the biological level, and what to eat instead, so you keep all the genuine benefits of seafood without the risks that undermine your glucose control. Write your country in the comments. And before we start, I want to say something directly. This is the kind of information your doctor should be telling you at every appointment, but doesn't. Subscribe so I can keep telling you. Let me tell you about George. He was 67, had been managing type 2 diabetes for 6 years, and considered himself a disciplined patient. He took his medication consistently. He had eliminated processed foods, refined sugar, and white bread. He exercised 3 times per week. By every reasonable measure, he was doing the right things. But his fasting glucose remained stubbornly elevated, and his HbA1c had not improved in 18 months despite all of his effort. When I reviewed his diet in detail, one pattern stood out. He ate fish 4 to 5 times per week, which seemed like an unambiguously positive habit. But his fish choices were almost exclusively from the list I am about to share with you: swordfish regularly, canned tuna in oil several times per week, tilapia from the supermarket 3 or 4 times per week, fried cod on Fridays as what he called his one indulgence. When we replaced those specific fish with better choices, his fasting glucose dropped 18 points over 8 weeks. His HbA1c improved by 0.4 at his next 3-month review. Nothing else changed. Same medication, same exercise, same overall dietary discipline. The fish he was eating, which he believed were helping him, were actively undermining his glucose control in ways he had no way of knowing about. Today, I'm going to make sure you have the information he was missing. Why fish choice matters more than just eating fish. Before we count down the 5 most problematic fish, I need to establish the biological framework that makes certain fish genuinely harmful for people managing diabetes. Because fish is not all the same, and understanding why requires looking at 3 specific mechanisms. The first mechanism is mercury and insulin signaling. Mercury is a heavy metal that accumulates in fish tissue through the food chain, with the highest concentrations found in large, long-lived predatory fish. In people with diabetes, mercury exposure is significantly more dangerous than in the general population for a specific reason. Research has demonstrated that mercury interferes directly with the function of beta cells in the pancreas, the cells responsible for producing insulin. In a system that is already struggling with insulin production and insulin sensitivity, any additional stress on beta cell function is consequential. Mercury also promotes oxidative stress and inflammation in the vascular system, which is already one of the primary complications of poorly controlled diabetes. The second mechanism is the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. Not all fish fats are equal. Omega-3 fatty acids reduce inflammation, improve insulin sensitivity, and support cardiovascular health. Omega-6 fatty acids, when consumed in excess relative to omega-3, promote inflammation, worsen insulin resistance, and increase cardiovascular risk. Certain fish have fatty acid profiles that are heavily skewed toward omega-6, making them pro-inflammatory rather than anti-inflammatory despite being fish. For a person with diabetes, where chronic low-grade inflammation is already a driver of complications. Eating fish that worsens the inflammatory environment is counterproductive. The third mechanism is preparation. The nutritional profile of fish can be completely transformed by how it is cooked. A lean, high-protein, low-glycemic impact fish becomes a vehicle for rapid blood glucose elevation the moment it is battered, breaded, and deep-fried. This seems obvious in principle, but is frequently overlooked in practice. These three mechanisms are the lens through which the following countdown needs to be understood. One more thing before we begin the countdown. I want to address a concern I hear from patients regularly when I start discussing specific foods within a category they believe to be healthy. The concern is that this kind of nuance makes healthy eating feel overwhelming. If even fish requires this level of scrutiny, how does anyone make good choices consistently? The answer is that the nuance is actually liberating once you understand it, because it means that the broad principle "eat more fish" is close to correct. It just needs to be completed with "eat the right fish, prepared the right way." The list of fish that actively support diabetes management is long and includes some of the most affordable and delicious seafood available. The 5 on today's list are the exceptions. Knowing the exceptions means you can eat from the much larger list of beneficial options with complete confidence. 5 most dangerous fish for diabetics. Fish number 5, swordfish. Swordfish is considered a premium choice in many restaurants and households. Its firm texture, mild flavor, and substantial nutritional profile make it appealing. For most healthy adults, occasional swordfish consumption is not a significant concern. For people managing diabetes, it presents a specific and meaningful risk that shifts the calculation. Swordfish is among the highest mercury-containing fish available for regular consumption. As a large, apex predatory fish with a long lifespan, it accumulates mercury through a process called biomagnification. Every smaller fish it consumes transfers its mercury load upward through the food chain, and swordfish sits at the top of that chain. The FDA consistently lists swordfish among the fish with the highest mercury content, alongside shark, king mackerel, and big-eye tuna. For people with diabetes, the concern about mercury goes beyond the general neurological risks that apply to the entire population. Research published in multiple endocrinology journals has established a connection between chronic mercury exposure and beta cell dysfunction. Beta cells are already under stress in type 2 diabetes. The combination of metabolic disease and mercury exposure creates a compounding effect on insulin production capacity that worsens over time with repeated exposure. Additionally, swordfish has a higher fat content than many other fish, with a fatty acid profile that is not as favorable as salmon or sardines. This does not make swordfish a harmful food for healthy people, but for someone whose dietary priorities include reducing inflammation and improving insulin sensitivity, the combination of high mercury and a less favorable fat profile makes swordfish a poor choice relative to the alternatives available. The practical guidance is straightforward. If you enjoy swordfish, limit it to no more than once per month and do not consider it your primary fish choice. The alternatives that provide similar protein content with dramatically lower mercury and more favorable fatty acid profiles, specifically wild salmon and sardines, give you everything swordfish offers without the risk. Margaret was 66 and had been eating swordfish twice a week at a local restaurant she frequented, believing she was making an excellent dietary choice. She had no idea that swordfish was among the highest mercury fish available. When I showed her the FDA's mercury level data and explained the beta cell connection, she switched to the restaurant's salmon option without difficulty. Her fasting glucose showed improvement at her 8-week follow-up. "I was proud of myself for choosing fish over meat," she said. "I had no idea I was choosing one of the worst ones." Fish number 4, mackerel from contaminated waters. This entry requires an important distinction because mackerel exists in several varieties with significantly different safety profiles. Atlantic mackerel, which is small, short-lived, and caught primarily in relatively clean North Atlantic waters, is actually one of the best fish available for people with diabetes. It is high in omega-3, low in mercury, and excellent for cardiovascular and metabolic health. The problem is with larger mackerel varieties, particularly king mackerel, Spanish mackerel caught in certain waters, and mackerel sourced from industrial coastal waters with known contamination. These larger, longer-lived varieties accumulate mercury at levels comparable to swordfish, and mackerel in general is sensitive to environmental contamination because it is an oily fish that concentrates fat-soluble pollutants efficiently. The challenge for most consumers is that fish labeling does not always specify the variety or origin clearly. When you see mackerel in a restaurant or unlabeled at a fish counter, you often cannot verify whether it is the beneficial Atlantic variety or one of the more problematic, larger species from potentially contaminated waters. For people with diabetes, the risk of misidentification combined with the high fat content of mackerel varieties from contaminated sources makes it a fish that requires careful sourcing rather than routine consumption. The omega-3 benefits attributed to mackerel are genuinely valuable, but they are available from better sourced alternatives, particularly sardines and wild Alaskan salmon, without the uncertainty about mercury and contaminant levels. If you enjoy mackerel and want to include it in your diet, specifically seek out Atlantic mackerel from verified North Atlantic sources and avoid king mackerel entirely. The distinction matters significantly for your metabolic health. Robert was 70 and had been eating tinned mackerel several times per week because he had read that oily fish was beneficial for diabetes. He was purchasing a variety that his supermarket stocked without clear origin labeling, and the sodium content was also significantly elevated. When I explained the difference between Atlantic mackerel and the larger varieties and the importance of sourcing and sodium levels, he switched to specifically labeled Atlantic mackerel in spring water. Within 6 weeks, his blood pressure, which had been creeping upward, showed a measurable improvement alongside his glucose readings. The intention behind his fish choice had been entirely correct. The specific product had been undermining those intentions. Fish number 3, canned tuna in oil with high sodium. Canned tuna is the most accessible and affordable fish in most households. For people managing diabetes on a budget, it seems like an ideal solution, and it can be if you choose the right version. The wrong version, which is also the most commonly purchased version, creates 2 specific problems for diabetes management. The first problem is the oil. Canned tuna packed in vegetable oil, typically sunflower or soybean oil, significantly increases the omega-6 fatty acid content of an otherwise lean fish. As established in the framework section of this video, excess omega-6 relative to omega-3 promotes inflammation and worsens insulin resistance. The tuna itself, being a relatively lean fish, would contribute to a reasonably balanced fatty acid intake. The vegetable oil in which it is packed converts it into a net pro-inflammatory food. The second problem is sodium. Many canned tuna products contain sodium levels that are meaningful relative to daily limits, and some contain added preservatives that further increase sodium content. For people with diabetes, the relationship between sodium and health is more consequential than for the general population because diabetes is already a significant risk factor for hypertension, and the combination of diabetes and hypertension dramatically increases cardiovascular risk. Consistently consuming high-sodium canned tuna several times per week adds to this cumulative risk. The solution requires only a small change at the supermarket. Choose canned tuna packed in water rather than oil. Choose low-sodium or no added salt varieties. Read the label before purchasing. Tuna in spring water with minimal sodium is genuinely one of the best convenient protein sources available for people managing diabetes. The same fish in the wrong preparation medium creates a different metabolic profile entirely. It is also worth noting the mercury consideration with canned tuna. Albacore or white tuna consistently tests higher for mercury than light tuna, which is typically skipjack. For people with diabetes who eat canned tuna frequently, choosing light tuna in spring water with low sodium gives you the best available combination of mercury safety, favorable fat profile, and manageable sodium content. The label contains all the information you need. The habit of reading it before purchasing is the only change required. Helen was 71 and eating canned tuna 4 times per week, believing she was making excellent choices. When I asked which variety she purchased, she described the standard tuna in sunflower oil with no attention to sodium content. She switched to water-packed low-sodium tuna without changing the frequency of consumption. Her afternoon blood glucose readings, which had been consistently elevated, showed a meaningful improvement within 3 weeks. The fish had not changed. Only the medium in which it was preserved had changed. Fish number 2, farmed tilapia. Tilapia is one of the most widely consumed fish in the world. It is cheap, mild-flavored, widely available, and perceived as a healthy white fish option. For people managing diabetes, farmed tilapia is one of the worst regular fish choices available for a reason that most people have never been told. The problem is the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, which in farmed tilapia is extraordinarily unfavorable. A study published in the Journal of the American Dietetic Association found that farmed tilapia has an omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of approximately 11 to 1. For context, the ratio considered health-promoting is closer to 4 to 1 or lower. Wild-caught salmon has a ratio closer to 1 to 1. Farmed tilapia has more in common with bacon in terms of its inflammatory fatty acid profile than it does with salmon. This ratio exists because farmed tilapia is fed primarily corn and soy-based diets, which are high in omega-6. In the wild, tilapia eat algae and aquatic plants, which produce a more balanced fatty acid profile. The farming process that makes tilapia so abundant and affordable fundamentally changes the fish's nutritional character. For a person with diabetes, consistently eating a fish with an 11 to 1 omega-6 to omega-3 ratio several times per week means consistently adding to the inflammatory load that drives insulin resistance, worsens cardiovascular risk, and complicates glucose management. You are eating what appears to be a healthy lean protein, but receiving a pro-inflammatory fat profile with every meal. Additionally, tilapia farmed in certain countries is raised in conditions that involve significant use of antibiotics and, in some cases, exposure to industrial runoff, creating contamination risks beyond the fatty acid problem. The solution is to remove farmed tilapia from your regular rotation entirely and replace it with wild-caught fish that offer genuinely favorable fatty acid profiles. Wild-caught salmon, sardines, herring, and mackerel from clean waters all provide the anti-inflammatory omega-3 content that supports insulin sensitivity and cardiovascular health. They cost more per serving than tilapia. For people managing diabetes, the metabolic difference justifies the cost. Dorothy was 69 and had been eating tilapia 3 times per week for 2 years, having switched to it from red meat on the advice of a general health article she had read. When I explained the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio in farmed tilapia and compared it to wild salmon, her response was direct. I was doing the right thing for the wrong reason with the wrong fish. She switched to sardines and wild salmon. Her inflammatory markers, which had been persistently elevated, improved at her next laboratory review. Fish number 1. Fried fish of any kind. This is number 1, not because of the species of fish involved, but because the method of preparation completely overrides whatever beneficial properties the fish itself possesses, and because fried fish is consumed with remarkable frequency across virtually every demographic. When fish is battered, breaded, and deep-fried, 3 things happen simultaneously that are each independently problematic for people managing diabetes, and combined create what is arguably the worst single meal format for glucose control. First, the breading. The coating on fried fish is almost universally made from refined flour, refined breadcrumbs, or a batter based on refined carbohydrates. These refined carbohydrates are converted to glucose rapidly after consumption. The glycemic impact of the breading on a portion of fried fish can be comparable to eating a serving of white bread alongside the meal. For someone managing diabetes, a food that was a lean protein with minimal glycemic impact has been transformed into a significant blood glucose challenge. Second, the frying oil. Deep frying occurs at temperatures between 170 and 190 degrees Celsius. At these temperatures, vegetable oils undergo oxidation and begin producing aldehydes, advanced glycation end products, and other inflammatory compounds. These compounds promote systemic inflammation, and chronic low-grade inflammation is one of the primary mechanisms through which diabetes complications develop and progress. Regularly consuming fried food means regularly consuming the products of high-temperature oil oxidation. Third, the caloric density. The combination of oil absorption during frying and the carbohydrate-heavy breading transforms a relatively low-calorie lean protein into a calorie-dense meal. For people managing type 2 diabetes, where weight management is often a central component of glucose control, this caloric shift matters cumulatively over weeks and months. The critical point is that any fish, including the ones that are otherwise excellent for diabetes management, such as cod, salmon, or sea bass, becomes problematic when fried. The preparation method is the variable that determines whether a fish meal helps or harms glucose management. There is a broader principle here that extends beyond fish. Advanced glycation end products, which are produced during high-temperature cooking of virtually any food, are themselves directly implicated in the progression of diabetic complications. The name is revealing. Glycation is the same process by which elevated blood glucose damages tissue in diabetes. Consuming large quantities of dietary advanced glycation end products adds an external source of the same molecular damage that high blood glucose causes internally. For a person with diabetes who is working to minimize glycation-related tissue damage, regularly eating foods prepared at high temperatures with oil is working against that goal at the molecular level. Baking, steaming, and poaching produce dramatically fewer advanced glycation end products than frying, for any food and for any fish. The alternative is straightforward. Baked, grilled, steamed, or poached fish preserves the protein content, the omega-3 fatty acids, and the lean caloric profile without adding refined carbohydrates or oxidized fats. A baked cod fillet is one of the best meals available for people managing diabetes. A battered deep-fried cod fillet from the same fish is one of the worst. James was 74 and had been eating fish and chips every Friday for years, describing it as his one weekly treat and his main fish consumption of the week. When I explained the combined impact of the batter, the frying oil, and the frequency, he replaced Friday fish and chips with baked salmon. His Friday evening glucose readings, which had been consistently his highest of the week, normalized within 3 weeks. Same day, same meal slot, completely different metabolic outcome. The fish you should be eating instead. Every fish on this list has a better alternative that provides the same or greater nutritional value without the risks. The core principle that ties all 5 of these fish together is the same principle that applies to every dietary decision in diabetes management. The intention to eat well is not sufficient on its own. The specific choices within a broad category like fish determine whether that intention translates into genuine metabolic benefit or inadvertently undermines the goals you are trying to achieve. George, whose story I told at the beginning of this video, was eating fish 4 to 5 times per week with complete dietary discipline and the best intentions. The specific fish he was choosing were actively working against his glucose control in ways he had no way of knowing. When the choices changed, the results changed. Same commitment, same discipline, better information. Instead of swordfish, eat wild-caught salmon. The omega-3 content is superior, the mercury level is dramatically lower, and the evidence for cardiovascular and metabolic benefit is among the strongest in the nutrition literature. Instead of large mackerel from uncertain sources, eat sardines. Sardines are among the lowest mercury fish available because of their short lifespan and position low in the food chain. They are extraordinarily rich in omega-3 and one of the most affordable premium fish options available. Instead of canned tuna in oil, eat canned tuna in spring water with low sodium. Same fish, same convenience, fundamentally different fat and sodium profile. Instead of farmed tilapia, eat wild-caught trout or herring. Both have favorable omega-3 to omega-6 ratios, clean sourcing options, and mild flavors that work in the same recipes where you would typically use tilapia. Instead of fried fish in any form, bake, grill, steam, or poach. The fish can be identical. The metabolic outcome will be completely different. Leave a comment telling me which of these 5 fish you eat most regularly and whether any of this changes your choices going forward. Your comment helps other people in this community make more informed decisions about what they are putting on their plate. If this video gave you something useful, share it with someone managing diabetes who believes they are making excellent choices by eating fish. They may be. Or they may be making the same choices George was making before we had this conversation. Subscribe if you haven't already. I'm Dr. Jake Taylor. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next video.